Barack Obama entered office with a message of hope and change, and as commander-in-chief to a war he opposed. He is the only president to spend 2 terms at war, so now, as his second and final term comes to the end, how have his policies affected the Middle East? We begin today's discussion with our Tel Aviv correspondent, Stephanie Freid. And Stephanie, Obama began his first term with hopes he could usher in lasting peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That has never happened. What went wrong, or what were the missteps made by the Obama administration?
Well, Anand, one of the major missteps was when President Obama came into office. He went on that historic Middle East tour. We just heard the landmark clip at the start of the program. He skipped Israel on that tour. Not only that, during that landmark speech that we just heard a bit of, he talked about, as we heard, renewed relations between the U.S. and the Muslim world. He also talked about supporting Iran's right for nuclear energy, and he talked about support for the Palestinians. That set off, that along with skipping Israel on that tour, set off alarm bells within Israel's public and within Israel's government. Now, fast forward to more recently, negotiations between the United States and Iran, according to former Israel ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, those happened behind Israel's back. Historically, the U.S. would talk to Israel about negotiations with an enemy country to Israel. That didn't happen. That being said, Palestinian-Israeli peace negotiations did happen during President Obama's tenure, but they fell apart very quickly. So, slight movement, but those 2 major missteps are the missteps that the Israeli public and the Israeli government have kept in mind throughout the President Obama presidency.
All right, and right now we're going through what is called the lame duck administration as we wait for President Obama to serve his term before President Donald Trump takes office. Any hope that peace will come in these last few hours? Is the Arab-Israeli issue less important for American policy makers than it used to be?
Well, any hope would really require a miracle. At this stage, 1 month left in office, very highly unlikely. That's after decades and decades the 2 sides have been trying, and they have not achieved a lasting peace deal. So it really would take a miracle. In terms of the importance of the Palestinian-Israeli peace process, it is important, but right now it's taking a back seat to the other issues, the other things that are happening in this region, quite frankly. President Obama, during his term in office, the Arab world caught on fire literally with uprisings from Libya to Egypt to Syria, which we're still seeing that's ongoing now. As well, that created a refugee crisis that the world is dealing with or trying to deal with until this day. And ISIL came onto or stormed onto the scene in 2013. That's something that the U.S. and international leaders are still trying to tackle. So is the Israeli-Palestinian peace process important? There's a saying that without peace between those 2 sides, there won't be peace in the region. But right now, it is not a top priority for the world and for the U.S. leaders. Anand.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's CCTV's Stephanie Freid reporting from Tel Aviv. Facing red lines and deadlines, will President Barack Obama leave the legacy he hoped for 2 presidential terms ago? To discuss all of this, we're joined by Raghida Dergham out of Beirut. Raghida is the founder and executive chairman of the Beirut Institute and senior correspondent for Al-Hayat. Also with us is Hamoud Salhi from Los Angeles. He is an associate dean and professor of political science at California State University, Dominguez, Hills. And from London, Abdel Bari Atwan, noted author and journalist, and currently the editor of el-Youm, a pan-Arab newspaper. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Raghida, let me start with you. What does President Obama's Middle East report card look like to you as he comes to the end of his term?
Well, not very nice and not very encouraging. It's not a good report because there's great disappointment in President Obama. The Palestinians are disappointed in him because he didn't deliver on what he started out with, which is a Palestinian-Israeli deal. The Gulf countries are disappointed because he broke the traditional relationships. Egypt is disappointed because they believe, from their point of view, is that he embraced the Muslim Brotherhood. Then you have a lot of broken hearts and broken promises in Syria. This is where President Obama drew two major red lines, one on the chemical weapons and the other one on Bashar al-Assad must go, and he walked his way back from it. So the legacy of President Obama is not very, it's not a good one here in the Middle East.
Abdel Bari Atwan, what is your assessment of President Obama's Middle East foreign policy?
I do agree with my colleague Raghida. Actually, his legacy is a complete failure in the eyes of many Middle Eastern people. People will remember Mr. Obama as the one who promised he will solve the Palestinian-Israeli problem and he will establish the independent Palestinian state and put an end to the Israeli settlement on the West Bank. He never actually accomplished or fulfill these kind of promises. Also, people in the Middle East will remember him as the one who was behind the NATO bombardment of Libya, which actually, okay, maybe it has succeeded in removing Gaddafi from power, but actually created a bloody anarchy in that part of the world. Also, when it comes to Syria, he never actually reached a peaceful solution to the problem, and at the same time, he wasn't actually decisive in his promise to intervene. So he lost the Syrian, he lost actually the Egyptian, he lost the Libyan. I don't think he won anybody, even in Iraq, when he said that the American intervention military intervention was behind the creation of the Islamic State. Maybe when he said that, actually, he did not win any hearts or minds in that part of the world.
Hamoud, if we look at these two terms for President Obama, perhaps the most significant event, or events, I should say, in the Middle East during his two terms was the Arab Spring. That was the wave of anti-government rebellions across the region. What did you make of President Obama's response to that?
Well, again, that shows to the extent how President Barack Obama also fell short on the perception or the expectations in the Middle East and Northern Africa. Let's not forget when this whole Arab Spring started, particularly in Egypt and Tunisia, Barack Obama came out and supported it. And New York Times, for example, also praised this movement, saw it as a means of change in the Arab world. But then things went south from there, a disaster to a disaster, and in part because the United States and President Barack Obama himself didn't take the proper measures or didn't take this movement as it ought to be, a movement that is pushing for democratic change, respect for human rights, and certain kind of human decency, particularly on issues of economic development, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Palestinian cause. That's sort of where it became very problematic. The answer that we've seen from President Barack Obama was really to support the status quo and to play the card of chaos, creating chaos or being a part of that creation of a instability, whether directly or indirectly. That sort of get us where we are here. The lack of decisiveness, the lack of support of a real, genuine interest, particularly at the beginning, Obama will be seen as someone who contributed to the problem more than tried to resolve it.
Right, we see chaos right now, but that was not how it all started. Raghida, President Obama came to office as the anti-war president. He was going to change course radically from that set by his predecessor, George W. Bush. But looking at this after two terms, I mean, is the Middle East anywhere near a safer place now than it was when he came to office?
Let us take one part of what President Obama has done. He responded to what the American public wanted and needed, and probably still wants and needs, which is they don't want body bags. They don't want to see blood of Americans. So what did he resort to? He resorted to drones. Drones do kill people, do kill civilians, do make mistakes. think of them as unethical, but he had to resort to them because they did not bring American body bags back home. They did not spill American blood. The civilians or others who were victims of the drones, they were not American. Therefore, the public did not scream. That's one. The other thing is that President Obama, he believed and put everything on hold, and he even turned a blind eye to massacres committed in Syria, to crime, to war crimes, to crimes against humanity, because he wanted to safeguard one of his most cherished accomplishments, that is the relationship with Iran, that is to put the nuclear deal with Iran up on a pedestal and not shake the grounds of it. That's why you never heard him criticize the Iranian action in Syria, despite the fact that the Iranian-made militias were fighting with the man he said he had to go, that is President Bashar al-Assad of Syria. You know, the Americans have always felt very good about claiming that they could take the higher moral ground, and that was something that is it is a pride of Americans to say, yes, we can take the higher moral ground. I don't think they can say that now after what President Obama has done in Syria. So yes, it's in shambles. The nuclear deal empowered Iran to do more in Arab lands. Therefore, you have more wars. And of course, like Atwan said, the Libyan fiasco is amazing. Yes, it's European first, but it's also American. And Egypt was saved, unfortunately, by a regime that would probably be called closer to the military regime, but it was saved from the rise of Muslim Brotherhood. However, yes, we have lots of problems in this part of the world. They are not the making of Barack Obama, but he certainly did not help.
Abdel, Bari, Atwan, how much of a priority was the Middle East for Barack Obama when he came to office? Did he get to the point where he realized that he was not going to score any big major diplomatic or political success in the Middle East, and therefore decided to move on to other foreign policy arenas, like the pivot to Asia, for instance?
You know, if we go back 8 years ago, for example, the priority of President Obama, which he explained in his speech in Cairo University in the beginning of his presidency, actually, what he said, my priority is to find a solution for the Arab-Israeli conflict. And he never actually achieved that, and he's washed his hand and turned his back completely to the Middle East. Also, the other point is, it is true, actually, he signed he was behind the signing of the Iranian nuclear deal. But we have to remember, we have to be fair to this man. Actually, this kind of signature prevented a war, maybe a third world war in that part of the world, because the situation was very tense. So to his credit, actually, he managed to diffuse the crisis with Iran in that part of the world. When, yes, he turned his back to the Middle East, he realized that it is a very problematic area. He doesn't want to lose, actually, his Nobel Peace Prize. He doesn't want to be seen as, adventurous or military adventurous U.S. president. And he went to Southeast Asia because his his country dependent on oil is shrinking, is not as it used to be. He realized that the Gulf region in particular will face a lot of problems simply because of the lack of democracy, the emergence of Islamic State, the internal actually problems. People are unsatisfied with their governments, with the austerity measures imposed on them. Also the war in Yemen. We have to talk about the war in Yemen. I don't know why Obama, for example, was absolutely silent when it comes to this war. About 10,000 people were killed. Right. The children are killed. Hospitals are bombed. So, he fed up of the Middle East, and he decided to go to Southeast Asia, hoping that he could achieve where he failed in that part of the world.
Hamoud, if we look at Syria as an example, how did President Obama get it so wrong? As Raghida pointed out at the beginning of the show, he drew these red lines on chemical weapons, another line drawn about Assad must go. None of that's happened. He got that seriously wrong.
He got it, but we also have to factor in the conditions and in the environment that President Obama is working with. let's not forget that the intervention or the Syrian crisis is but a product of the preemptive doctrine that George W. Bush created before. So it is a continuity on that pattern. I think the crisis in Syria got more complicated and more complicated because of the fact that the United States continued to disengage a little bit with conscious, not getting involved in ways that one would have expected it or not expected it. And second thing, giving a free hand or getting other surrogates to play a role that the United States thought will play on its behalf. And the third reason is to create an opposition that is proven time and again that is ineffective and unable to lead the Syrian for a democratic change, whatever that means. The United States, in doing so, has contributed more to the problem, as I said earlier, than resolving it. Now, the crisis that the United States has in Syria is linked to Iran. It's linked to the region as a whole, and particularly now with the regional sort of competitiveness that continues to exist between an Iranian pole and a Saudi pole, that the United States found itself sort of in a very difficult position, having to choose between supporting fully the Saudis or its Gulf partners and Iran, which proves to be a player that it needs to think about it twice and more seriously. So looking at Syria, I think the conditions, the environment sort of became very, very complicated for the United States. And for that matter, the decision, I think, remains whether to continue with the status quo, given creating a situation where, the interests of the Syrian people are respected. And for that, the United States is still struggling and is still not finding a way of how to work on that. And they believe that the status quo, continuing to create this instability, the crisis that Syrian people are going, serves it. And it's more of a managing the things the way they are than producing results. And this is not to ignore the fact that there are plans behind designed to fragment Syria to serve other parties.
Okay, we are going to take a break right now. Much more on Obama's legacy in the Middle East when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.